Next, we'll be hearing from Ben Graydon, an advocate for change in our education systems and an active player in the expanding culture of homeschooling. He will present a cogent and informative history of public education and show how it has been designed to serve the government, not the people.
Most of us will always remember exactly where we were on September 11, 2001, when we first heard that two airliners had just crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. But do we remember where we were on April 20 of 1999 when two 17-year-old students strode into their school, Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado, and opened fire on their classmates yelling, "This is awesome! This is what we've always wanted to do! Today's the day we die!" And do you believe in God? That event shocked our nation and sobered many to the reality that there are some serious problems with our education system today. But do we really understand? Do we know what's wrong with education today and how those problems came to be? Do we even know what education really is, what it requires, who must be involved in it, and why we do it the way that we do? Education is now the #1 issue in every political campaign from minor local office to president. Everybody's talking about it, but few have more answers than questions. And for those who are doing something, the few who seem to have the answers, what are they doing? And why is it effective? Well, we know this much. Education is vital. Let's face it, education is exactly why you're listening to this audio seminar right now. Something was missing from the education that you got before, or you wouldn't need this education now, would you? So what exactly is education? Most of the time we think of education as the knowledge and skills that we learn. Someone has said that education is what we remember after we forget everything that we learned. But it's more than that. If you ask professional educators what their profession is all about, they will define education something like this. Education involves the transfer of values from one generation to the next. That's right. Education is about what we think, what we believe, how we should live, what we value, what we believe is right and wrong. It's our lifelong search for truth. Our education defines what kind of person we are and what we will become. Something or some things have changed in our education system that require us to play catch-up now. In order to discern what those changes have been and what, if anything, can be done to correct them, we must first take a look at the history of education in North America. From there, we can determine how our education system has not only changed itself, but also how it's caused substantial changes in all of our enterprises of government, business, and community life. Then perhaps we will be challenged to make some new changes that will better fit our needs today. The very first American education law was written by the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1647. The Old Deluder Act required that any community, upon reaching a population of 50 families, hire a teacher. When the community grew to 100 households, they were then to build a school building. The Puritans understood the need for literacy, particularly to enable all citizens to be able to read the Scriptures for themselves in order to withstand the devil, or that old deluder Satan. The Old Deluder Act of 1647 predated the founding of America as a nation by more than 100 years, so it was not obviously an example of national government involvement in education. It was a local community effort that arose from the needs of local families, and it was focused only on teaching children to read, the most basic educational skill. Few of America's founding fathers received much of their education in an organized school setting. While some attended private schools, most were schooled at home by their parents or private tutors, or they were self-taught. Ben Franklin, for example, started school at the age of 8, then came home when he was 10 to assist in his father's business, and he learned mostly from his father, who, by the way, had very little or no formal schooling. Washington attended school for only 2 years, then taught himself. Jefferson studied with a private tutor. This was the early American pattern. Yet, as John Adams remarked in 1765, a native of America who cannot read or write is as rare an appearance as a comet or an earthquake. Schooling continued to be available for all who wanted it and pursued it. An 1830 article in the Philadelphia National Gazette said, "Education in general must be the work of the intelligence, need, and enterprise of individuals and associations." At present, in nearly all of the most populous parts of the United States, it is attainable for nearly all the inhabitants. Some New England schools were tax-supported under state law, but they had to compete with academically superior private academies. Education across most of the country, however, was completely laissez-faire. School attendance was voluntary, and schools were funded either privately or by charity. And what were the results of America's early education efforts prior to the rise of an organized school system? Well, according to the census of 1840, fully 90% of white adults were listed as literate. In 1860, that number had risen to 94%. By way of comparison, a 1993 U.S. Department of Education study showed that only 50% of American adults were moderately literate. In the early 1800s, changes in Europe led to state control of education there. Educational elites and intellectual leaders in America, particularly the Harvard Unitarians and followers of Robert Owen, were attracted to the idea, believing that placing all children in a centrally controlled institutional environment under the direction of the state would lead to a perfect society. It was the beginnings of socialism, even before the term was invented. These early American socialists were attracted to what was happening to education in Germany. The Prussian public school system had everything that they wanted: full state funding by involuntary taxation, teachers trained by the state, a standard state-prescribed curriculum, age-segregated classrooms with military-like discipline, compulsory attendance laws enforced by truant officers, and effective ways to keep independent-minded parents in check. Promoted first in liberal churches in New England, universal public education following the Prussian model soon became viewed as the best way to preserve America's Protestant majority from a flood of Catholic immigrants. Protestant denominations joined together on the basis of what they shared in common, hence the term common schools. But many did not realize that much of what they agreed to had a very different purpose, one that they would only begin to understand over a century later. And interestingly, after the American Civil War, Northern bankers and industrialists brought the Prussian model of schooling to the defeated South. Horace Mann, known as the father of American public education, oddly enough did not start out with any particular interest in education. His teaching experience was limited to 2 years as a tutor at Brown University just after his graduation from there. He went on to become a lawyer, then to serve in the Massachusetts state legislature. After his election in 1836, Massachusetts Governor Edward Everett set out to remake his state's education system after the Prussian model. As president of the Senate, Horace Mann led the passage of a new law that Everett wanted to allow him to appoint a state school board, effectively taking control of local schools out of the hands of local officials and placing it in the hands of the state. Everett then appointed Mann as the secretary of the new Massachusetts State School Board. Mann took on his new job with the zeal of a missionary, and he regarded the transformation of education into a state-controlled, tax-supported bureaucracy as a mission. Supported by wealthy, influential friends, Mann focused with the zeal of a martyr on the task of perfecting the human race and creating heaven on earth through universal state-run education. Abraham Lincoln had said, "The philosophy of the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy of politics, government, and life in the next." To determine the philosophy that would reign in the classroom, social planners and other supporters of state-run education had to determine who would be the teachers in the classroom and what the teachers would believe. To accomplish that, Mann concentrated on establishing teacher colleges known as normal schools. James G. Carter, in an 1825 pamphlet, called the first normal school at Lexington, Massachusetts, quote, "an engine to sway the public sentiment, the public morals, and the public religion more powerful than any other in the possession of the government," unquote. And it became a model that was visited, studied, and duplicated nationwide, though it contributed immediately to a reduced literacy by promoting the whole word method of teaching reading. Mann also set out to convince the middle and professional class to withdraw their children from private schools and to place them in the new common schools for the good of the entire society. He appealed to their religious sentiment first by pointing out that the common schools had first been set up for religious purposes, but he misrepresented what that purpose was, which was to teach children to read the Scriptures, not that they might perfect other children by forced association.